Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, the day is close approaching for the release of the most difficult activity that has ever been a part of Diablo 4. At least that is what is being touted by the developers, who've gone out of their way to say that they believe no one will be able to complete the final tier, Tier 25, of the Abattoir of Zir. Not in our current power, and not even with the insane power increase we'll be getting from the Tears of Blood glyph from the activity itself.
Doubt.
The way I see it, unless they scale it so ridiculously hard that even Tier 20 isn't possible, players will find a way. The absolute best builds in the entire game can treat a Tier 100 Nightmare dungeon like it's filled with World Tier 1 trash mobs, and from the scaling that we've seen from the demonstrations that they've shown us, the way that I see it playing out is the players with all of the gear in the world will get a good distance day one, but Tier 25 will probably not happen until someone gets some serious level upgrading on the Tears of Blood glyph that comes in the event itself. All that said, today we're going to talk about the Abattoir of Zir and its difficulty specifically in relation to each class and talk about which class is going to have the best and worst time, so I will rank them from what I predict will do the best and to what will do the worst, with of course the specific note that I believe every class will absolutely be able to complete Tier 1 of the Abattoir of Zir. I have no doubt in my mind of that, and that is the major hurdle where things open up for you, because this will give you a ton of glyph XP, this will give you the brand new glyph which is extremely powerful, and so for all intents and purposes, every class is good enough to complete Tier 1 of this activity, which is the important one. This list is simply ranking how high of a tier I think each class can reach if they really push themselves to the absolute limit of what's capable in the game. First up then, let's talk about Barbarian. Specifically, we're talking about the Hammer of the Ancients builds and variations of it that do so much damage that they can one-shot uber bosses, which of course is just such ridiculous damage that it should be overkill for general existence even in the highest tiers, which means that you can drop off a bit of that damage, build in some defense instead, do something like Melted Heart of Selig, which with Barb's crazy resource generation, combined with the fact that they actually gain resource when being hit, it's actually basically just an extremely natural synergy that increases your tankiness tenfold. On top of that, this build is one of the most modifiable with Uber Uniques. Most builds in the game can only really use 2 Uber Uniques at most without creating some really nasty anti-synergies, whereas Barb can easily slot in the Grandfather for a ridiculous damage increase that also gives you thousands of bonus maximum health for bonus tankiness, Doombringer for the damage reduction and damage increase of the Shadow Pools themselves, and also the 40% maximum life increase affix on it, Selig as I already mentioned, and then Shaco, which of course is just massively good for everything. These all actually synergize effectively within Hammer of the Ancients and take slots where they don't hurt the build at all, just replacing numerical differences with larger, more important numerical differences to make the build significantly better. As a result, I think Barbarian specifically, with anyone with all of those 4 Ubers in use at the same time, is going to be the people that have the best shot of really knocking the door down on Tier 25 of the Abattoir of Zir, which is why I put it in first place. In a relatively close second place, I've got Sorcerer taking up this slot, and most specifically, Ball Lightning builds. Sort of similar to Hammer of the Ancients, Ball Lightning has stupidly high damage potential that means for any activity like this, you can actually back off the throttle just a touch on damage to build in some more survivability. And this is another build that combos extremely well with the Melted Heart of Selig Uber Unique for an instant surge of massive tankiness, but then once again, like Barbarian, this build has a special ability to use a lot of Uber Uniques without destroying their base synergies, specifically their combo being Selig, Shaco, of course, for the defense, cooldown reduction and offensive gain of +4 ranks to all skills being absolutely nutty, and then actually a Havarian, the Uber Unique staff. The reason for this is partially because the affixes on the staff itself are just incredible in general for this build, and even more so for specifically this type of activity, meshing really well with the goals of the build anyways. But then the unique effect of the weapon is especially relevant to Abattoir of Zir, activating a random shrine effect when you kill an elite once per 30 seconds. You should be able to keep pretty constant uptime on this honestly as you pass through the various tiers of the Abattoir, and importantly it seems like the final endpoint of the Abattoir is the spawning of 3 high tier elites, so with this staff, once you kill the first one of these, the other 2 should end up being quite easy. I think generally speaking, this build and class has a similar upper level potential to what Barbarian does, but because it is less tanky in general, and also because it will rely on the RNG of which shrine buffs it gets from a Havarian at any given time, I just think the consistency of that peak will be much lower than what Barbarian has. Then here's where it sort of drops off a little bit. Both of those 2 builds at their absolute peak I think will reach the 20s at least with a shot of hitting Tier 25. The next 2 I can see reaching the mid to high teens, and between them I think the one with a slight edge is going to be Rogue. The main reason for this is that Rogue has a bug going this season with Tybalt's Will that lets them gain up to 20 bonus combo points, which essentially means that they can just do exponentially more damage than they are supposed to be capable of doing under normal circumstances. That said, the developers have left that in the patch and decided that it wasn't too busted to exist for this activity. All that considered, the top Rogue builds abusing this, such as Poison Twisting Blades or Rapid Fire Penetrating Shot builds, do absolutely insane damage that should be able to keep up with the Abattoir as tiers go up without a problem. But the issue is that the activity leaves no room for error on deaths. You die one time and it's done, that's it. And Rogue is arguably the squishiest of all 5 classes, so you just have less capacity to take damage than anyone else does, relying more on your movement to actually avoid the damage entirely. That said, there will be a pretty big divide between Rogue players who can use their movement tools effectively to avoid damage and those who can't, and that will be the big decider on how far Rogue can get as far as how high it can push its tier of Abattoir of Zir. 4th place then, by not by too much, I've got Necromancer, and it's just because the event is timed, pretty much. Necromancer has the Infinimist build, which is ludicrously tanky and offensively strong enough to take down tier 100 Nightmare dungeons from that bubble of safety, but with the scaling health of enemies in Abattoir of Zir, it seems unlikely that the damage of that build will be able to keep up, which means that Necromancer instead is going to want to lean more into Bone Spear. It's the highest damage option, and creating a version of that simply has a lot more of a defensive focus on it to be able to survive anyways. This means, like Rogue, Necromancer will be relatively squishy compared to what Sorc and Bard can accomplish, though they can take advantage of Selig, which Rogue can't really. So likely the situation is that Rogue will reach its limit just from getting one shot by random enemies, whereas Necro will probably reach its limit by just not being able to kill stuff quite fast enough for the timer without entering enough danger to die and lose the whole run anyways. Then in last place, unfortunately, I have the Druid. The thing with Druid is that it can get tanky, ridiculously tanky, like unstoppable levels of tankiness, but in doing so, it sacrifices so much damage. The quote-unquote fastest Druid builds, as far as getting through enemies quickly, are also the ones that tend to be the squishiest, with the best middle ground being Tornado Wolf, and the thing is, Tornado Wolf simply has a cap here. You can't get a stupid tankiness bonus from something like Selig because it just doesn't work in that build without destroying some synergies and neutering the damage of it. You could potentially work in a Havarian maybe, and Shaco of course is an easy slot in, but even then the issue is just that the damage of Tornado Wolf takes time to build up and set up properly. It isn't an instant smash like Hammer of the Ancients or a field of damage that sticks to the player like Ball Lightning that you can carry around with you. The tornadoes are essentially projectiles, and your main damage comes from stacking loads of tornadoes on enemies, which means the second that you move away from the group of tornadoes you've already set up, you have to start all over from the beginning again on the next group of enemies, and that is just a very slow way to progress compared to the other classes. In a world where there was no timer on this activity, just progress to the end and live regardless of speed, Druid would be in an incredible position, but with the timer that we have, it's simply going to limit Druid's cap a little bit, and I believe it will likely end up with the lowest high tier completion of Abattoir of Zir as a result. That's all that I had to say on this then, just a discussion and theoretical ranking of the classes and their best builds, looking ahead into the Abattoir of Zir releasing tomorrow. Of course, once again, I do want to reiterate that everything I've mentioned here should easily be able to clear out the tier 1 of the Abattoir, or even the first few, which is of course the biggest hurdle that everyone does want to get through. This ranking is just a discussion of what I think is the best chance of hitting and clearing tier 25, or even just the best in general. On which note, I'm interested to see how they've balanced it because we don't really know what the higher tiers are like, but I would be surprised if we go more than a couple of weeks without somebody being able to beat tier 25. I really fully expect it to be happening, and I expect it to be a juiced out barbarian with 4 uber uniques on at the same time in a run where they just get insane luck with their crit and overpowered chance to power through the enemy health bars like they're nothing. I hope you all enjoyed this discussion then, and let me know your own thoughts down below. If there's anywhere you think I'm wrong and why, or even just your own general expectations for this activity. Are you excited for it, or are you someone who doesn't like running meta builds and doesn't really expect to enjoy the activity as a result? Like if you like the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.